The autumn wind whipped through downtown Portland as Sarah Martinez walked briskly toward her car. The 52-year-old woman had just finished her evening shift at the Veterans Counseling Center, where she worked as a trauma therapist. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she wore simple jeans and a navy blue jacket that had seen better days. To anyone watching, she looked like any other middle-aged woman heading home after a long day at work. Sarah had always preferred to keep a low profile. After nearly 3 decades of military service, she had learned the value of blending in, of not drawing unnecessary attention to herself. The skills that had once made her one of the Navy's most elite operators now helped her navigate civilian life with quiet confidence. She carried herself with perfect posture, her eyes constantly scanning her surroundings. But most people simply saw a helpful therapist who worked with troubled veterans. The parking garage was dimly lit, with several fluorescent bulbs flickering overhead. Sarah's footsteps echoed softly as she made her way to her modest Honda Civic on the 3rd level. She had parked in the same spot for the past 4 years, close to the elevator but not too close to attract attention. Old habits died hard, and even in civilian life, Sarah maintained the tactical awareness that had kept her alive during countless dangerous missions. As she reached into her purse for her keys, Sarah heard heavy footsteps approaching from behind. She didn't turn around immediately, instead, using the reflection in her car window to assess the situation. A tall man in military fatigues was walking toward her with purposeful strides. His buzz cut and the way he carried himself immediately identified him as active-duty military, probably Marine Corps, based on his bearing and uniform details. The man appeared to be in his late 20s, with broad shoulders and the kind of build that came from years of intense physical training. His face was set in a hard expression, and Sarah noticed his hands were clenched into fists at his sides. There was something about his posture and the way his eyes darted around that suggested he was dealing with some kind of internal struggle. Sarah turned slowly to face him, keeping her hands visible and her body language non-threatening. She had dealt with enough troubled veterans to recognize the signs of someone who was fighting their own demons. The man stopped about 10 feet away from her, his chest rising and falling with rapid, shallow breaths. "Ma'am," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "I need your car keys." Sarah studied his face carefully. She could see the telltale signs of someone who hadn't slept in days. His eyes were bloodshot, with dark circles underneath, and there was a slight tremor in his hands that suggested he was either coming down from something or dealing with severe stress. His uniform was wrinkled and looked like it hadn't been changed in at least 24 hours. "I can see you're having a rough time," Sarah said gently, her voice calm and steady. "What's your name, Marine?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. He had expected fear or immediate compliance, not this quiet, motherly concern. For a moment, his aggressive posture wavered, and Sarah caught a glimpse of the scared young man beneath the tough exterior. "Just give me the keys, lady," he said, trying to regain his threatening demeanor. "I don't want to hurt you, but I will if I have to." Sarah nodded slowly, as if she was considering his request. In reality, she was assessing every detail of the situation. The man was clearly trained, but his stance was sloppy, compromised by whatever emotional or chemical state he was in. His weight was distributed unevenly, and he was standing too close to the concrete pillar on his left, which would limit his movement options. "You look like you just got back from deployment," Sarah observed, taking a small step to her right to position herself better. "Iraq? Afghanistan?" The question hit him like a physical blow. His face contorted with pain and anger, and Sarah could see tears beginning to form in his eyes. This was clearly someone who had seen too much, done too much, and was now struggling to find his place in a world that didn't understand what he had been through. "Shut up," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "You don't know anything about it. Just give me the damn keys and I'll be gone." Sarah could see that he was reaching a breaking point. His hands were shaking more violently now, and she noticed the way he kept looking over his shoulder, as if he expected to be attacked from behind. This was a man who was still mentally on the battlefield, unable to distinguish between the war zone he had left behind and the peaceful parking garage where he now stood. "I know more than you think," Sarah said quietly. "I know what it's like to come home and feel like you don't belong anywhere. I know what it's like to wake up in the middle of the night wondering if the person you've become is someone you can live with." The Marine's eyes widened slightly. There was something in Sarah's voice, a tone of understanding that he hadn't expected from a civilian, but his desperation was stronger than his curiosity, and he took another step toward her, his fists clenched even tighter. "Stop talking," he growled. "I'm not playing games here. Give me the keys or I'm going to take them from you." Sarah could see that words alone weren't going to diffuse this situation. The young man was too far gone, too desperate and confused to respond to reason. She had been in similar situations before, though under very different circumstances. The skills she had learned during her years as a Navy SEAL had taught her how to read people, how to predict their actions, and how to respond with just the right amount of force to neutralize a threat without causing unnecessary harm. "Okay," she said, reaching slowly into her purse. "I understand you're in pain. I understand you think this is your only option right now." The Marine tensed, ready to spring into action if she tried anything unexpected. But Sarah's movements were deliberately slow and non-threatening. She pulled out her key ring and held it up where he could see it. "These keys won't solve your problems," she said softly. "Taking my car won't take away whatever happened over there. It won't bring back whoever you lost. It won't make the nightmares stop." "Shut up," he screamed, finally losing what little control he had left. "You don't know what you're talking about. You've never been there. You've never had to." His words dissolved into a sob, but his body was already in motion. Years of military training kicked in as he lunged toward Sarah, intending to grab the keys and push her aside. In his mind, this was just another mission, another obstacle to overcome. He had no idea that he was about to attack someone whose training made his own look like a weekend camping trip. Sarah moved with fluid precision that seemed to defy the laws of physics. One moment she was standing still, holding her keys, and the next she was behind the Marine with his arm twisted behind his back and his face pressed against the concrete pillar. The entire movement took less than 2 seconds and made almost no sound. The Marine struggled briefly, trying to use his size and strength to break free. But Sarah's grip was like iron. She applied just enough pressure to control him without causing injury, using leverage and technique rather than brute force. It was a perfect demonstration of the advanced close-quarters combat training that had made her one of the most effective operators in naval special warfare. "Easy," Sarah said, her voice still calm and soothing despite the fact that she had just neutralized a much larger opponent. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just need you to calm down and listen to me for a minute." The Marine was breathing hard, partly from exertion and partly from shock. He had expected to easily overpower what he thought was just another civilian, and instead, he found himself completely helpless in the hands of someone he had initially dismissed as harmless. The reality of the situation was slowly starting to penetrate his confused state of mind. "What the hell?" he gasped, still trying to process what had just happened. "How did you—" 29 years, Sarah said simply. 29 years of learning how to protect people, including people who are trying to hurt themselves or others because they can't find another way to deal with their pain. She maintained her hold on him but adjusted her grip slightly to make it more comfortable. She could feel the tension starting to drain from his muscles as the fight-or-flight response began to fade. This was the critical moment when she would either be able to reach him or would have to consider more drastic measures. 29 years of what?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Navy," Sarah replied. "Special operations. I know exactly what you've been through because I've been there myself. The difference is that I had 29 years to learn how to come home." The words hit him like a sledgehammer. Everything he thought he knew about the situation had just been turned upside down. The quiet, middle-aged woman he had tried to rob was not only a veteran but someone whose service record probably made his own look like a training exercise. The shame and embarrassment of his actions began to mix with a desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, he had found someone who might actually understand. Sarah felt his body go completely limp as the reality of what she had just told him sank in. She slowly released her hold on him and stepped back, giving him space but remaining ready to react if necessary. The Marine turned around slowly, his face a mixture of confusion, embarrassment, and desperate hope. "Navy SEALs?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Sarah nodded. "Started when I was 19. Retired as a Master Chief 3 years ago. Spent most of those years doing exactly what you've been doing. going places that most people can't even imagine, and doing things that most people couldn't handle. The Marine slumped against the concrete pillar, all the fight gone out of him. He looked like a broken man, someone who had been carrying an impossible burden for far too long. Sarah could see the moment when his carefully constructed walls finally crumbled, and the pain he had been trying to hide came flooding to the surface. "I can't," he began, then stopped, unable to find the words to express what he was feeling. "Everything is so messed up. I can't sleep. I can't think straight. I keep seeing. I keep remembering." "I know," Sarah said gently, moving closer but keeping her hands visible and non-threatening. "I know exactly what you're remembering, and I know why you can't sleep. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" The Marine looked up at her with red-rimmed eyes. "I don't know. I thought, maybe if I could just get away, just disappear somewhere, maybe it would stop. Maybe I could forget." Sarah shook her head slowly. "Running doesn't work. Believe me. I tried that for the first few years after I got back. All it does is make the ghosts follow you wherever you go." She reached into her purse again, this time pulling out a business card. The Marine tensed slightly, still not entirely sure that this situation was real. But Sarah's movements remained slow and deliberate. "This is where I work," she said, handing him the card. "Veterans Counseling Center, just 6 blocks from here. We help people who are dealing with exactly what you're going through right now." The Marine took the card with trembling hands and stared at it for a long moment. "Marcus Thompson," he said suddenly. "My name is Marcus Thompson. Corporal. 2nd Battalion. 1st Marines. 2 tours in Afghanistan. 1 in Iraq." "Thank you for your service, Corporal Thompson," Sarah said formally. Then her voice softened again. "And thank you for trusting me with your name." That took courage. Marcus let out a bitter laugh. "Courage? I just tried to rob someone in a parking garage." "That's not courage. That's desperation. Sometimes they look the same from the outside," Sarah observed. "The question is what you do next. You can keep running, keep trying to solve this by yourself. Or, you can accept that maybe you need help from people who understand what you've been through." Marcus was quiet for a long time, staring at the business card in his hands. Sarah could see the war going on behind his eyes, the battle between the pride that told him he should be able to handle this on his own, and the desperate need for someone to help him carry the burden he had been shouldering alone. "Why are you helping me?" he asked finally. "I tried to rob you. I threatened you. Why aren't you calling the cops?" Sarah smiled sadly. "Because 3 years ago, I was standing in a parking garage just like this one, looking at my service weapon and trying to decide if I had the courage to use it on myself. Because someone helped me when I couldn't help myself, and now I try to pass that forward whenever I can." The honesty of her answer seemed to break something loose inside Marcus. The tears that had been threatening to fall finally came, and he slumped against the pillar as 20 months of accumulated pain and trauma finally found an outlet. Sarah stood quietly nearby, neither approaching nor retreating, just being present in the way that only someone who had walked the same dark path could be. When the worst of it had passed, Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and looked up at Sarah with something approaching gratitude. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now you have a choice," Sarah replied. "You can take my card and come see me tomorrow, or you can keep running and see where that leads you. Either way, I'm not going to call the police, and I'm not going to judge you for what happened here tonight." Marcus nodded slowly, tucking the card into his pocket. Will you be there? At the center? "I'll be there," Sarah promised. "And if you decide to come, I'll tell you something I learned during my 29 years of service. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help." As Marcus walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the parking garage, Sarah finally allowed herself to relax. She got into her car and sat for a moment, thinking about the young Marine and hoping that she had managed to plant a seed that might eventually grow into healing. She had learned long ago that you couldn't save everyone, but sometimes you could give someone the tools they needed to save themselves. The drive home was quiet, but Sarah's mind was racing. She thought about her own journey from active duty to civilian life, about the dark period when she had questioned whether she could ever find her place in a world that seemed so different from the one she had known for nearly 3 decades. She thought about the people who had helped her, the veterans counselors and therapists who had shown her that her service didn't have to end with her retirement, that there were other ways to continue fighting for something that mattered. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, typical Pacific Northwest weather that matched the somber mood at the Veterans Counseling Center. Sarah arrived early, as was her habit, using the quiet time before her colleagues arrived to prepare for the day ahead. She made herself a cup of coffee and reviewed her appointment schedule, wondering if Marcus Thompson would find the courage to walk through their doors. At exactly 9 o'clock, Sarah heard the familiar chime of the front door. She looked up from her desk to see Marcus standing in the waiting area. Looking around nervously, he had changed out of his military uniform and was wearing civilian clothes that looked like they had been hastily purchased from a thrift store. His hair was still military short, but he had attempted to make himself look more presentable. Sarah walked out to greet him personally, something she didn't do for all her clients but felt was necessary in this case. Marcus's eyes widened slightly when he saw her, as if he still couldn't quite believe that their encounter the previous night had been real. "Good morning, Marcus," she said warmly. "I'm glad you decided to come." "Some there." Marcus shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot. "I wasn't sure I would," he admitted. "I must have walked around the block 4 times before I finally came in." "That's normal," Sarah assured him. "The first step is always the hardest. Why don't we go back to my office where we can talk privately?" Sarah's office was deliberately designed to be calming and non-threatening. The walls were painted in soft earth tones, and she had filled the space with plants and comfortable furniture rather than the sterile desk and chairs setup found in many clinical environments. A few carefully chosen photographs showed scenes of peaceful landscapes, and there were no military memorabilia or reminders of conflict visible anywhere. Marcus sat down in one of the armchairs and looked around the room with obvious surprise. "This isn't what I expected," he said. "What were you expecting?" Sarah asked, settling into the chair across from him. "I don't know. Something more official? Clinical? This feels more like someone's living room." Sarah smiled. "That's the idea. We've found that people are more willing to open up when they feel comfortable and safe. Military people especially tend to shut down in environments that feel too much like debriefings or medical evaluations." Marcus nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "So what happens now? Do you ask me a bunch of questions about my childhood and how my parents treated me?" "Actually, I'd like to start by telling you a little bit about my own story," Sarah said. "I think it might help you understand why I do this work and why I think I might be able to help you." Over the next hour, Sarah shared details of her military career that she rarely discussed with anyone. She told Marcus about her early years in the Navy, about the grueling training that had forged her into one of the first female Navy SEALs, and about the missions that had taken her to some of the most dangerous places on Earth. She described the camaraderie she had found with her fellow operators, the sense of purpose that had driven her through nearly 3 decades of service, and the gradual realization that her military career would eventually have to end. She talked about the difficulty of transitioning to civilian life, about feeling like an outsider in a world that seemed trivial compared to the life and death situations she had been trained to handle. "The hardest part," Sarah said, "wasn't the physical danger, or the long deployments, or even the times when missions went wrong. The hardest part was coming home and feeling like I didn't belong anywhere, like the person I had become in the military was someone that couldn't exist in the civilian world." Marcus was listening intently, nodding at certain points as if Sarah was describing his own experiences. "That's exactly how I feel," he said quietly. "Like I'm 2 different people, and I don't know which one is supposed to be real." Sarah leaned forward slightly. "The truth is, they're both real. The Marine who served his country with honor and distinction is real. The man who's struggling to find his place in civilian life is also real. The challenge is figuring out how to integrate those 2 parts of yourself into someone you can be comfortable living with." For the first time since he had arrived, Marcus seemed to relax completely. The rigid military posture he had been maintaining softened, and he slumped back in his chair as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. I've been carrying this around for so long, he said. I thought I was going crazy. I thought maybe I was just weak, that other people could handle this stuff, and I couldn't. Other people aren't handling it, Sarah said firmly. The suicide rate among veterans is more than double the civilian rate. The divorce rate, the unemployment rate, the substance abuse rate. They're all higher among veterans because this transition is genuinely difficult, and we're not doing enough to help people through it. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing what Sarah had told him. When you found me last night, he said finally, when you stopped me from doing what I was trying to do. How did you know? How did you know I wasn't just some criminal trying to rob you? Sarah considered her answer carefully. 29 years of reading people, she said. You carry yourself like military. But more than that, you had the look of someone who is fighting a war that nobody else could see. I've seen that look in the mirror enough times to recognize it in someone else. And the way you stopped me? Marcus asked. That wasn't just 29 years of reading people. Sarah smiled slightly. No, that was 29 years of advanced combat training. Navy SEAL training is designed to prepare you for any situation, including situations where you need to neutralize a threat without causing permanent harm. Marcus shook his head in amazement. I still can't believe it. When you said Navy, I thought maybe you meant you worked on a ship or something. I never imagined that I was a SEAL. Sarah finished. Most people don't. Even now, 3 years after retirement, people have a hard time believing that someone like me could have done that kind of work. Someone like you? Marcus asked. A woman in her 50s who works as a therapist and drives a Honda Civic, Sarah said with a laugh. People expect Navy SEALs to look like action movie heroes, not like someone's mom. Marcus was starting to understand the full scope of what had happened the previous night. You could have hurt me badly, couldn't you? When I tried to grab you? I could have ended the situation in about a dozen different ways, Sarah admitted. But hurting you wouldn't have solved anything. You weren't really trying to rob me. You were drowning, and you thought taking my car might throw you a life preserver. What you needed wasn't to be punished. You needed someone to actually throw you a real life preserver. The conversation continued for another hour, with Marcus gradually opening up about his experiences in Afghanistan and Iraq. He talked about losing friends to roadside bombs, about the constant stress of never knowing when an attack might come, and about the crushing responsibility of making life and death decisions while barely out of his teens. Sarah listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions but mostly just allowing Marcus to tell his story at his own pace. She recognized the therapeutic value of simply being heard by someone who understood the context of his experiences. The worst part, Marcus said, is that I know how lucky I am. I made it home. I've got all my limbs. No major physical injuries. I should be grateful. But instead, I feel guilty all the time. Guilty that I survived when better people didn't. Guilty that I can't just move on and be happy like everyone expects me to. Survivor's guilt is one of the most common issues we deal with here, Sarah said. And it's made worse by the expectation that you should just be grateful and move on. It doesn't work that way. Grief and trauma don't follow a schedule. And they don't disappear just because you feel like you should be over them. Marcus looked up at her with something approaching hope in his eyes. So, I'm not crazy? This isn't just weakness? You're not crazy. And it's not weakness, Sarah said firmly. What you're experiencing is a normal response to abnormal circumstances. The question is what we do about it now. They spent the rest of the session discussing practical strategies for dealing with Marcus's symptoms. Sarah explained the various treatment options available, from traditional talk therapy to more specialized approaches designed specifically for combat veterans. She talked about the importance of building a support network and finding new sources of purpose and meaning in civilian life. As the session was winding down, Marcus asked the question that Sarah had been expecting. Why did you leave the Navy? After 29 years, you must have been close to the top. Why give all that up? Sarah was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. I left because I realized that my war was over. But there was still a battle to be fought here at home. There are thousands of veterans like you who are struggling to find their way, and not enough people who really understand what they've been through to help them. She gestured around her office. This isn't less important than what I did in the military. It's just a different kind of service. Instead of protecting people from external threats, I'm helping them protect themselves from internal ones. Marcus nodded slowly, beginning to understand the broader picture. So you traded one kind of mission for another. Exactly, Sarah said. And if you're willing to put in the work, I think we can help you find your own new mission. Something that honors your service while giving you a reason to look forward instead of backward. As Marcus prepared to leave, Sarah handed him a folder containing information about the various programs offered by the center, as well as some reading materials specifically designed for combat veterans dealing with transition issues. I'd like to see you twice a week for the next month, she said. After that, we'll reassess and see how you're doing. In the meantime, I want you to promise me something. What's that? Promise me that if you start feeling like you did last night, if you start thinking that running or hurting yourself is the only option, you'll call me instead. Day or night. Doesn't matter. I've been where you are, and I know how dark it can get, but I also know it can get better. Marcus took the folder and tucked it under his arm. I promise, he said. And for the first time since Sarah had met him, he seemed to mean it. After Marcus left, Sarah sat in her office for a few minutes, thinking about their conversation. She remembered her own early sessions with a counselor, the disbelief and skepticism she had felt, and the gradual realization that asking for help wasn't a sign of weakness but actually required considerable courage. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the director of the center. How did it go with the walk-in from yesterday? Inlan. Why? Sarah typed back quickly. Better than expected. I think he's going to be okay with some work. Dr. Chen appeared in her doorway a few minutes later. Was that the young Marine you told me about? The one from the parking garage? Sarah nodded. Marcus Thompson. 2 tours Afghanistan, 1 Iraq. Classic presentation of combat stress and survivor's guilt. But he's motivated to get help. Dr. Chen sat down in the chair Marcus had vacated. Do you think your military background made a difference in reaching him? Absolutely, Sarah said without hesitation. He was ready to dismiss me as just another civilian who couldn't possibly understand what he'd been through. When he found out about my service record, it completely changed the dynamic. That's why we need more people like you, Dr. Chen said. Veterans helping veterans. There's a credibility there that those of us without military experience can never quite achieve, no matter how well trained we are. Sarah looked out the window at the gray Portland sky. I just wish we could reach more of them before they get to the point Marcus had reached. Too many of them are suffering in silence, thinking they have to handle this alone. Well, maybe Marcus will help us reach some of them, Doctor, Chen suggested. Sometimes, the most effective outreach comes from peer referrals. Veterans talking to other veterans about getting help. That evening, Sarah drove home thinking about the day's session and about the long road ahead for Marcus. She knew from experience that recovery wasn't a straight line, that there would be setbacks and difficult days ahead. But she also knew that Marcus had taken the most important step by admitting he needed help and being willing to accept it. As she pulled into her driveway, Sarah's phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID and saw Marcus's name. For a moment, her heart rate spiked as she wondered if he was having second thoughts or if the day had been too overwhelming for him. Hello, Marcus, she answered. How are you doing? I'm okay, he said. And she could hear traffic in the background. I just wanted to call and say thank you. For last night. For today. For everything. You don't need to thank me, Sarah said. This is what we do. No, Marcus said firmly. You didn't have to help me last night. You could have just given me your keys or called the police. Instead, you saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. That means everything. Sarah felt a familiar warmth in her chest. The same feeling she had gotten during her military service, when a mission was completed successfully and everyone made it home safely. Just promise me you'll keep coming to the sessions, she said. The work is just getting started. I'll be there, Marcus promised. And Sarah? I think I'm starting to understand what you meant about finding a new mission. Maybe helping other veterans like you're helping me. After the call ended, Sarah sat in her car for a few minutes, thinking about the unexpected turns that life could take. 24 hours ago, she had been going about her routine evening, never expecting to encounter a desperate young veteran in a parking garage. Now, she had potentially helped save a life, and maybe gained an ally in the ongoing mission to help other veterans find their way home. 6 months later, the Veterans Counseling Center was bustling with activity on a crisp spring morning. Sarah was reviewing notes for her afternoon group session when she heard familiar laughter coming from the main reception area. She looked up to see Marcus Thompson talking animatedly with 2 other veterans, his whole demeanor transformed from the broken man she had encountered in the parking garage. Marcus had been coming to individual sessions twice a week for the first month, then once a week for the next 2 months. After that, he had transitioned to the group therapy sessions that Sarah facilitated for combat veterans dealing with transition issues. The change in him had been remarkable, though not without its challenges along the way. "Sarah," Marcus called out when he saw her approaching. "I want you to meet someone." Standing next to Marcus was a young woman in her early 20s with short cropped hair and the unmistakable bearing of someone with military training. She was wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt, but she carried herself with the same confident posture that Sarah had learned to recognize in fellow service members. "This is Jessica Rodriguez," Marcus said. "She just got out of the Army last month. I've been telling her about the program here." Sarah extended her hand to Jessica, immediately noticing the firm handshake and direct eye contact that spoke to military training. "It's nice to meet you, Jessica. What was your specialty in the Army?" "Military police," Jessica replied. "2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq. I got out because—" She hesitated, glancing at Marcus for support. "Because the transition was harder than she expected," Marcus finished gently. "Just like it was for all of us." Sarah could see the same lost expression in Jessica's eyes that she had seen in Marcus 6 months earlier. The young woman was clearly struggling with the same issues that affected so many veterans. The feeling of not belonging in civilian society, the loss of purpose and camaraderie that came with leaving the military, and the difficulty of processing experiences that most people could never understand. "Why don't we all sit down and talk?" Sarah suggested, leading them to a comfortable seating area in the main lobby. "Jessica, Marcus tells me you might be interested in our programs. What's been the biggest challenge for you since getting out?" Jessica looked around nervously before answering. "Everything feels pointless," she said finally. "In the Army, every day mattered. Every mission had a purpose. Now I'm working at a coffee shop, and I can't figure out why any of it matters. I feel like I'm wasting my life." Sarah nodded understandingly. "That's one of the most common struggles we see. The sense that civilian life lacks the intensity and purpose of military service. Marcus, do you remember feeling that way?" Marcus leaned forward, his expression serious. "Remember it? I was convinced that nothing I did in civilian life would ever matter as much as what I did in the Marines. I thought the best years of my life were behind me, and everything from here on out was just going through the motions." "What changed?" Jessica asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Marcus glanced at Sarah before answering. "Sarah helped me realize that service doesn't end when you take off the uniform. There are different ways to serve, different missions to complete. I just had to figure out what mine was going to be." Over the next hour, Sarah watched as Marcus shared his own story with Jessica, describing his darkest moments and the gradual process of rebuilding his sense of purpose. It was remarkable to see how far he had come, not just in terms of his own healing, but in his ability to help others who were walking the same difficult path. Marcus had become one of the center's most effective peer counselors, using his own experiences to connect with newly discharged veterans in ways that even trained professionals sometimes couldn't. His military service gave him instant credibility, while his journey through recovery provided hope and practical guidance. "The thing that Sarah taught me," Marcus was saying to Jessica, "is that all the skills you learned in the military? Leadership, problem solving, working under pressure, caring about something bigger than yourself, those don't disappear when you get out. You just have to find new ways to use them. Sarah smiled as she listened to Marcus articulate concepts that had taken her months to help him understand. This was exactly what she had hoped would happen when she first started working with him, that he would not only heal himself but become a resource for other veterans facing similar challenges. "So what's your mission now?" Jessica asked Marcus. Marcus grinned. "Actually, that's something I wanted to talk to you about, Sarah. I've been thinking about this for a while, and I think I'm ready to make it official." Sarah raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Make what official?" "I want to go back to school," Marcus said. "Get my degree in counseling or social work. I want to do what you do. Help veterans who are struggling to find their way." The announcement filled Sarah with pride and satisfaction. She had seen hints of this direction in Marcus over the past few months, as he became more and more involved in helping other veterans at the center. His natural empathy, combined with his personal experience and military background, made him ideally suited for this kind of work. "That's fantastic, Marcus," Sarah said. "Have you looked into programs yet?" "I've been researching options," Marcus replied. "Portland State has a good social work program, and they have specific tracks for working with veterans and trauma survivors. I've already started the application process." Jessica looked back and forth between them, clearly trying to process everything she was hearing. "So you went from trying to—" She paused, seeming to remember that they were in a public space. "You went from being in a really dark place to wanting to help other people in similar situations?" "That's exactly right," Marcus confirmed. 6 months ago, I thought my life was over. I thought the pain would never stop, and that I would never find anything that mattered as much as my military service. Now I know that this work, helping other veterans, matters just as much as anything I ever did in the Marines." Sarah could see that Jessica was beginning to understand the possibilities that lay ahead of her. The young veteran's posture had changed subtly during the conversation, becoming less defensive and more open. Her eyes had lost some of their hopeless quality and were showing the first sparks of curiosity about what her own future might hold. "Would you be willing to sit in on one of our group sessions?" Sarah asked Jessica. "Just to observe. See what it's like? No pressure to participate unless you feel comfortable." Jessica nodded slowly. "I think I'd like that." The group session that afternoon was one of the most dynamic Sarah had ever facilitated. In addition to Jessica observing, there were 6 regular participants, including Marcus, all veterans from different service branches and different eras. The topic of the day was finding new sources of meaning and purpose in civilian life. Sarah watched as the group members shared their experiences and insights with each other. There was Tom, a Vietnam veteran who had struggled for decades before finding peace through volunteer work with homeless veterans. There was Jennifer, a former Navy petty officer who had discovered a passion for teaching and was now working with at-risk youth. There was David, an Army veteran who had started a nonprofit organization focused on providing job training for recently discharged service members. Each of them had found their own way of channeling their military experience into civilian service, creating new missions that honored their past while building toward a meaningful future. As Sarah listened to them share their stories, she realized that this was exactly what she had envisioned when she first started working at the center. Marcus was particularly eloquent during the session, sharing his decision to pursue a career in counseling and explaining how his perspective on his military service had evolved. "I used to think that leaving the military meant leaving my purpose behind," he said. "Now, I realize that my military service was just the first chapter of my story, not the whole book." After the session ended, Jessica approached Sarah privately. "I want to start coming to the individual sessions," she said, "and I want to be part of the group. I can see that there's hope here, and I want to find my own way forward." Sarah felt the familiar satisfaction of seeing another veteran take the first steps toward healing. "I'm glad to hear that, Jessica. We'll set up your intake appointment for next week, and you can start attending group sessions whenever you feel ready." As the day wound down, Sarah found herself reflecting on the remarkable transformation she had witnessed in Marcus. From a desperate young man contemplating theft in a parking garage to a confident peer counselor preparing for a career in helping others, It was exactly the kind of success story that made all the difficult days worthwhile. Marcus knocked on her office door as she was preparing to leave. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Marcus sat down across from her desk, his expression serious but not troubled. "I wanted to ask you something that I've been thinking about for a while now. That night in the parking garage, when you stopped me from making the biggest mistake of my life, was that really just coincidence? Just random chance that you happened to be there at that moment? Or," Sarah considered the question carefully. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I think about that sometimes too. What I do know is that it doesn't really matter whether it was coincidence or fate or divine intervention or just random luck. What matters is what we did with the opportunity." Marcus nodded. "That's what I've come to believe too. But I also think that maybe my experience can help other people who might be in similar situations. Not just through counseling, but through outreach, going to places where veterans gather, talking to people who might be struggling but haven't asked for help yet." "That's an interesting idea," Sarah said. "What did you have in mind?" "I've been thinking about starting a program where we train veterans to recognize the warning signs in their peers," Marcus explained. "Sort of like the buddy system we used in the military, but adapted for civilian life. Veterans looking out for other veterans, knowing what to watch for, and how to intervene if necessary." Sarah leaned back in her chair, impressed by the scope of Marcus's thinking. "That could be incredibly effective," she said. "Veterans are much more likely to open up to other veterans, and they're also more likely to notice when someone is struggling." "Would you be willing to help me develop something like that?" Marcus asked. "I know I still have a lot to learn, but I think this could really make a difference." "I'd be honored to help," Sarah replied. "And I think Dr. Chen would be very interested in discussing it as well. This is exactly the kind of innovative approach we need to reach veterans who might not otherwise seek help." As Marcus left her office, Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction and purpose. This was why she had left her military career behind. Not just to help individual veterans like Marcus, but to create a ripple effect that would extend far beyond her own direct involvement. Marcus was now becoming a leader in his own right, someone who would go on to help countless other veterans find their way. That evening, Sarah drove home through the same parking garage where she had first encountered Marcus. As she passed the spot where their initial confrontation had taken place, she couldn't help but smile at the transformation that had taken place. What had begun as a potentially tragic situation had evolved into something beautiful and hopeful. Her phone rang as she was walking to her car, and she was surprised to see Marcus's name on the caller ID again. She wondered if he was having second thoughts about their conversation earlier. "Hello, Marcus," she answered. "How are you doing?" "I'm great," he said, and she could hear the genuine happiness in his voice. "I just wanted to call and let you know that Jessica signed up for her first individual session. She also asked if she could volunteer to help with some of the center's outreach programs." "That's wonderful news," Sarah said. "She seems like she has a lot of potential." "She does," Marcus agreed. "And Sarah? I keep thinking about what you said, about how service doesn't end when you take off the uniform. I think I'm finally starting to understand what you meant. This feels like the most important work I've ever done." After the call ended, Sarah sat in her car for a moment, thinking about the unexpected journey that had brought her to this point. 29 years of military service had prepared her for many things, but she could never have predicted that her most meaningful mission would come after she had retired from the Navy. As she drove home through the quiet Portland streets, Sarah felt a profound sense of gratitude for the path her life had taken. She had traded the adrenaline and intensity of special operations for the quieter, but equally important work of helping veterans heal and find new purpose. It wasn't the career she had originally planned, but it was exactly where she was meant to be. The transformation she had witnessed in Marcus was just one example of what was possible when veterans were given the support and understanding they needed to successfully transition to civilian life. Each success story created the potential for more success stories, as healed veterans went on to help others who were still struggling. Sarah knew that there would be many more Marcus Thompsons and Jessica Rodriguezes in her future. Veterans who had served their country with honor but were struggling to find their place in the civilian world. Some would be easier to reach than others, And not all of their stories would have happy endings, but each one represented an opportunity to make a difference, to honor their service by helping them find new ways to serve. As she pulled into her driveway, Sarah reflected on the unexpected turn her life had taken. From Navy SEAL to therapist, from combat operations to healing operations, from protecting people from external threats to helping them overcome internal ones. It was a different kind of mission, but it was no less important, and it was definitely no less challenging. The work would continue tomorrow, and the day after that. And, for as long as there were veterans who needed help finding their way home, Sarah Martinez, retired Master Chief Petty Officer and current guardian angel to struggling veterans, was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead.